freak. I'm game.
Today in Ancient DOS Games, we're taking a look at Brain Dead 13, which upon first glance you're probably wondering how this is even a game when it's literally nothing but cartoon animations. Well, this is one of those games which fits a very special category of game, originally introduced in arcades and then making its way to home platforms throughout the 90s, often referred to nowadays as QTE FMV games, or rather, Quick Time Event Full Motion Video. The idea being that the entire game is just a sequence of QuickTime events, QTEs being where you need to press a specific button with specific timing to succeed and move forward with more gameplay. The very first game released in this style was Dragon's Lair, back in the 80s, which used the near-instant syncing of Laserdisc technology to allow for selective playback of various video recordings. Thus, if a player entered the right input at the right time, the game would continue, but if not, a death animation would play out, and they'd have to do the current area over again. What makes Brain Dead 13 very curious is that most QTE FMV games came out in the arcades first, and were then later ported to other consoles and computers, as the ports often suffered greatly in terms of video quality, since CDs held significantly less video data than a Laserdisc could. Brain Dead 13, however, never saw an arcade release, which means it was never limited to the restrictions of using Laserdiscs as the primary format. Thus, there's a lot of optimizations and animation tricks going on here, which would have otherwise been impossible. Thus, the game's a bit more dynamic than its predecessors. Unfortunately, it does have some technical and design issues which mar the experience. Otherwise, this could have easily risen to be one of the best of the genre.
Alright, Squirt! Third down, bases are loaded, and we're pulling the goalie!
Brain Dead 13 was originally developed and published by the Canadian company ReadySoft in 1995, though nowadays it, and in fact even the Dragon's Lair games, are owned by Digital Leisure. And as mentioned before, this is a one-player QTE FMV game, supporting VGA 320x200 256 color graphics, and an insane number of audio devices. I mean, geez, I hadn't even heard of a couple of these until now. As for its current release date, it's still commercial, and grabbing a copy is an interesting prospect. Firstly, there was a digital release sometime back in 2010, but only for iOS devices, and as far as I can tell, it's no longer up on Apple's App Store, so that's no longer an option. Now granted, finding physical copies is thankfully pretty easy, as I sourced dozens when I went searching. But there's a couple things to watch out for. This game was released from multiple platforms, so you have to make sure you're getting the one you want, keeping in mind the DOS and Windows versions come on the same CD, and that the 3DO and PS1 versions are 2 CDs big because the video quality is higher. But what's really crazy about trying to find copies of this game is that the prices are super freaking wacky, and there doesn't seem to be any rhyme or reason to any of it. I was seeing copies for all platforms for as low as $5 and as high as freaking $150. Whether it was fully boxed, just a CD with a jewel case, didn't seem to make any difference at all. The prices were just all over the map. Worse still, this carried through to both active and sold listings. Yeah, people were actually spending insane amounts of money on this, while at the same time, others were spending pocket change. So, because of that, it's hard to know just how much this game should be selling for. But no, it's not nearly as rare as some sellers are trying to make it sound. Again, I found several dozen active listings with minimal effort. So I would say, wait out the prices which make sense to you as a buyer, and don't get duped into thinking this is anywhere close to rare.
Oh man, what a piece of junk!
I'm actually going to skip on the story section for this review because there's actually not much of one. You play the role of Lance, a computer repair technician who's been called to service a computer being run by the evil Dr. Neurosis, who is literally just a brain in a jar trying to take over the world. After being called average by Lance, who sees him for the cliché video game villain he is, the evil doctor sends his heavily armed assistant Fritz after him. Your goal is to make your way through the castle, defeating various hostile characters along the way, then defeat Fritz, and finally Dr. Neurosis himself, so you can escape and move on with your on-site computer-fixing life. Now, right off the bat, I have to say the controls are not good. Now, don't get me wrong, the controls are actually really simple. You use the arrow keys or numeric keypad to input directions to move, and spacebar for actions, like jumping and attacking. If you press the correct button with the correct timing, you hear a high-pitched beep. If the timing is wrong or the button is wrong, you hear a low-pitched beep. That's not the problem though. The problem is that there's a delay. Between hitting the button and hearing confirmation that your input was accepted can take several frames of gameplay, and in a game where timing is crucial and can come down to split seconds, these kinds of delays really put a damper on things. Now granted, DOSBox is probably partly to blame, just from the nature of how sound emulation has to be done in modern emulators, but I know what my audio delay settings are like, and I know that these delays are much longer than they should be. Furthermore, to understand the next thing I want to address, let's talk about Dragon's Lair for a moment. Dragon's Lair was the gold standard for this style of gameplay, since it came first. And one of the things Dragon's Lair does is flashes objects for a split second when it's time to perform an action. Now, this gives the player not only an idea of timing, but what they should be doing, and helps connect the player to the gameplay so that they feel like they're actually doing something. Now, it doesn't flat out say which buttons to push, rather, it gives a visual suggestion as to how to proceed. Now, some games in this style took other approaches, such as flashing little indicators instead of objects themselves, or some games will just flat out tell you what to push. Well, Braindead 13 doesn't do any of this. In fact, it has no visual suggestions for anything. 100% of this game is disconnected trial and error. No indications of what to push or when to push those things, made worse by some parts of the game having extremely short windows of time for pressing the right keys. Coupled with the delays, this can make it amazingly unintuitive as to what you need to be doing. As an example, there's this sequence with one of the characters you go up against, a stylist named Vivi, where she tries to shave your face off, and then this arm coming out of a mirror tries to stab you with a sword. Now right here, you can see that I completely fail to dodge the sword. I attempt this again, press the right button, but fail to dodge the sword. What? Okay, did any of you catch what happened there? I pressed the right button, yes, but there's only a 6-frame window after the sword stab begins where I have to input another button. To put that in perspective, all of the animation in this game runs at about 12 frames per second, so a 6-frame window is half a second, which might sound like plenty of time if you know exactly what to do, but keep in mind there's not only a delay on the controls, but I cannot buffer the inputs either. If I press the second input required before the first input is cleared, I fail the first input. So I not only have to wait until the first input clears, but I have only half a second after it clears to punch in the right key with no indication of what the timing is on any of this, or even what inputs to press. I was stuck here for a surprisingly long amount of time because of this. It's not helped either when a lot of the input ranges time out before the animations are finished playing, especially when dealing with the intersections, which makes the timing on things just that much more stressful. The lack of feedback to the player about what to do and when severely hampers the quality of the gameplay. And that's a shame because even though I started this review in a negative light, most of what I have to say from this point forward is positive. For instance, the intersections. The game is actually non-linear, so in essence, you're able to explore the castle and approach all the different areas in any order you want, and can even backtrack, with some rooms having different obstacles to clear depending on which direction you entered them from. This room down here has a giant centipede if you come in from the bottom left, but you'll face a giant web-shooting spider instead if you come in from the top right. Now, this room has a marionette to deal with if you come in from the bottom, but if you come in from the top, you simply dodge Fritz for a little. So, given the non-linearity, what's to stop you from just going straight to the end? Well, near the lairs of the twin witches on either side of the castle are these spots where, if you walk up to them, you'll just end up falling down a long shaft to your death. But once you've defeated all of the evil doctor's minions, you'll see elevators in these spots instead, which lead down to the final battle with Fritz, followed by the final battle with Dr. Neurosis himself. So even though you can do everything in any order you want, you still have to do all of it to beat the game. Though it should be noted that clever players who go through all of the rooms in the right order can actually skip going into a few of them entirely, with the easiest room to avoid being this cavern filled with goopy acid shooters, since both entrances to it are accessed from the same 4-way intersection. Now, the game unfortunately does a poor job of relaying what you're supposed to be doing to defeat the various minions, since in most circumstances, you'll end up at a particular point in a sequence and will actually have a branching decision without even realizing it, one of which will be to escape the minion and bring you back to the castle passages, the other of which will produce more sequences to ultimately defeat that minion in some way. Or in the case of the twin witches, you need to steal a spare eyeball from each of them in their cauldron rooms. But their cauldron rooms are hidden in directions which are completely unintuitive. Here's one of the screens right before the cauldron room. Guess which direction you go to reach the cauldron? Freaking down! How would anybody figure that out without a walkthrough when the other directions are so blatantly obvious? I will say though, this game is packed with animation, and the quality is not all that bad for the time. It's using a technique where instead of having both the background and animation packed into the same video data, only the animation is packed away with a transparent background, while the backgrounds themselves are just static images. This is what makes it possible to have the quality higher while still having a large amount of animation given the limited space of a CD. In fact, there's a substantially large number of death animations here, more than was really necessary, and a few of which you may miss because when they occur is incredibly specific. Especially the ones for the intersections when Fritz catches up with you, as there's a bunch of those, but they're all randomly selected. There's a couple other things left to mention still. Since the game was sold direct to consumers and never showed up in the arcades, it has a couple unusual but not unwelcome design choices, including the lack of both an extra live system and a score counter. Now, these kinds of games in arcades would have extra lives so that if you ran out, you'd need to put in a quarter to get some more and continue playing, which also might in turn reset your score to 0. The scoring in these games was typically done in a special way where each successful action in a row without dying would be worth successively larger amounts of points. So the longer you can go without making a mistake, the higher your score will be compared to someone making mistakes frequently. Now this game has no score counter and no quarters to gobble up, thus no reason to track extra lives, thus unlimited lives. Also, for this entire video, you may have been hearing the low and high ping sounds from my attempts to play it, but if you go looking up videos online, you may notice the ping sounds being absent. But you can't turn off the ping sounds, so if you're not hearing them, it's because the person playing is cheating. There's a cheat menu you can access by holding the control key down on the main menu and typing out ReadySoft. Now this menu is primarily made for testing purposes and allows you to select which part of the game you want to see, along with how you want to see it, either as a full playthrough of that scene showing all outcomes, showing specifically all of the deaths, or showing a deathless run through it. When going through a scene in cheat mode, none of the beeps are heard, so that's how you can tell if someone's actually playing or if they're just letting the game play itself. The reason I looked this up even is because I ran into a weird situation up against a sports player named Moose, where I needed to defeat him, but for some reason the input to do so wasn't working, so I was racking my brain trying to figure out what was wrong. Well, when I used the cheat mode to see the proper outcome, I realized I'd actually already seen it, but forgot. And this is why the major battles even have a branching path near the end to begin with, because once you've defeated one of these minions, you're not allowed to defeat them again, meaning you're forced to escape. And this is something to keep in mind if you start forgetting what you have and haven't yet done. Overall, Brain Dead 13 is a mixed bag. Well, the animation's really well done. The music is decent, albeit repetitive, but the gameplay is just not there. There's too much of a disconnect between the player and what's happening on screen to feel like you're having much of an effect. Having to guess what you're supposed to do and when, instead of being visually directed, means the player's just blindly hoping to figure things out instead of being given a challenge to interpret and overcome. And that doesn't make the game unplayable, but it does make it less enjoyable, and it is the one change which could have elevated this to the same level of quality as Dragon's Lair, even potentially higher given the non-linear gameplay. If Digital Leisure ever decides to remaster this game, I hope they'll consider adding some sort of timing indications, either as an option or directly into the animations, because it would just make this game way more playable. Now, the game does run with the AutoWare Max cycle settings, but you'll get some skipping in the audio. Instead, I recommend a fixed cycles count of 20,000. Yeah, very simple to get working in DOSBox. Anywho, that's all for today's episode of Ancient DOS Games. Next Saturday on ADG Pro, we're going to be diving into an old inventory-based adventure game to try playing it in a way few people ever attempt, to try and answer an intriguing question about how it keeps score. So make sure to stay tuned for that. Thanks for watching, everyone, and extra special thanks to those of you supporting me on Patreon. Here's just a small set of you guys.